This is adding up the other B3 cells on all the other sheets named East through West. And the sheet tabs are East to South, Midwest, and West. All sheets, cell B3 on every one of them, we're getting a nice total. Now, what we might also want here, and you can imagine how if we had many sheets, one for each state, one for each city within a cluster of cities, something like that, we might have many sheets using this kind of a model. All these sheets have the same layout. Now, as it turns out on all these sheets, the total for each of the regions is going to be on cell G6. Now, it would be nice if we could simply put in a formula right here that gets the data from the East. And if you were doing this manually, this would probably be as efficient as any way. Rather than copying and pasting, build the formula at the destination. This is where we want to see the data equal. Then click on the East sheet. Click on the cell in question. It's in color out there, and simply hit enter. And that's what we see. If you look at the formula, you'll see that it refers to sheet names with an exclamation point. We see that there. Now, a very unusual function in Excel, and it's one of those that I've seen so many descriptions of it that just don't do it justice, and it always seems a little bit strange, is a function called INDIRECT. And many times the way it's described, and let's actually use this from the Formulas tab, under Lookup and Reference, INDIRECT returns the reference specified by a text string. And that doesn't tell us a whole lot, does it? Here's one example, and this will not bring true. I'm going to put a cell address here. For example, B4. If I use the INDIRECT function and refer to this cell, the answer is going to be 2,710. So by referring to D9, which has a cell address, it's going to use that, you might say, indirectly and gather the data that's in cell B4, it's 2710. And I'm sure many of you would be saying, and I know I said when I first saw this, well, why would I ever use that? That doesn't really make any sense. Well, let's go back to this idea here. What would be efficient here, and particularly if you had many sheets, but even here it's going to be efficient. Why can't we just take this kind of a setup here and copy this formula downward into other cells? If we could somehow pick up these names as well. So what I'd like to do first of all to help with the example is to just move this over here, edit it, put a space in front of it so we can just remind ourselves what it looks like. So I'm temporarily turning that into a non-formula so we can see it here. Now, if we use the INDIRECT function to pick up the word East, then we can construct essentially this kind of a formula. And then if we copy it downward, it's going to pick up the word South and Midwest and West. Give this a shot. Equal INDIRECT. Left parenthesis. And we want to get the data from here. And looking at the formula over in E9 as a reminder, what do we want to come after the word East? Within double quotes, we want to get the exclamation point, and then G6. Don't really have to capitalize it, but it looks better. G6, double quote. And that's the answer. A quick jump over to the East sheet just to make sure. There it is, 17,980. And, of course, quick formatting here. Maybe just copy this one down there, drag it with the right mouse button, format. Looking good. And if we double click here, we've got our totals for the others as well. Again, at first looking a little strange, and I think you can begin to see this has some merit here. I do have a model like this that uses all the states, and of course it's very efficient there. We do this once and copy it down into 50 other entries. It works beautifully. So the INDIRECT function has some real power here. There's another power tool with this that is even more impressive. And let's move into the next sheet to the right. It's called INDIRECT 2. Second example here. On this worksheet, the entry for column A is labeled state. The entry for column B is labeled city. A real popular feature in Excel these days is the pick list idea by way of data validation. Let's imagine in this particular scenario, a company has offices in various states, does businesses in various cities within those states, and to speed up data entry and to make life more efficient here, what we'd like to be able to do in column A is, first of all, set up a list of entries that must be state names. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit here so we can see this a little bit more clearly. The state names in question are right here. If you haven't used data validation, it's a great feature. It's often very straightforward, but in column A, or the range you're interested in, go to the Data tab, Data Validation, set up a data validation rule, and what we want to allow in column A here is information that only can come from this list. And what's the source of that list? I'll move this over. Just these cells here. These are the only states we do business in. Click OK. And that's a simple single level data validation. Anytime we click here, we got to pick one of these states. There's a scroll bar. Here and there you need that zone. Now, for each state, there is a different list of possible cities. For Illinois, it's these cities right here, and for Ohio, of course, he's got a different set of cities. What we now want to do is another level of data validation based on what's in column A. When we come to Illinois here, we want to get a drop arrow that shows only the Illinois cities. We come to Ohio, we want to see a drop arrow that only shows us those. We want the data validation entries in column B to be based on what's in column A. Now, the missing ingredient here is how we make a reference to this. And what we have to set up also is range names. In other words, we want a range name for Illinois that essentially refers to these cells, and a range name for California that refers to these cells. As I scroll rightward a bit, one problematic issue is the different states have different numbers of cities in them. But we won't let that stop us. And I might zoom back a little bit so we can see all the cities. California, an example, has more cities. There we go. So here's what we like to do. And rather than painstakingly create range names, we want to take advantage of a capability here that lets us apply either the top row, bottom row, left column, right column as the name. So in this case here, we're going to be highlighting all of these cells. And on the Formulas tab, Create from Selection. Automatically generate names from the selected cell. The names we're going to create will be taken from the left column. So what we've done now is defined AZ to be a range name that consists of these cells right here, all the way out to column O. In every case, it's all the way out to column O. And that's a slight irritant that you'll see in a bit. Now, what pulls this together is the fact that now we want to set up data validation here, and for every state, we need to be looking into the cell to its left. If we do this for the entire column, we'll be making a reference to A1, and A1 itself, we use that simply because, as we start here, it's to the left of B1. So it works better when you highlight the entire column, it just makes it more efficient. So in column B, we want to set up another data validation rule using a list. But the source of the list will be equal indirect. We're going to be using cell A1. Even though literally A1's not in question, but by inference, any cell we're using in B1 will automatically refer to the corresponding cell in A1. And that's why we'll get this funny message as we click OK here that sends a shudder through some of us. When we see it the first time, the source currently evaluates to an error. Do we want to continue? Yes, we do, and we're ignoring it. So now, Illinois, we click here. We're only seeing the Illinois cities. There they are. They beat Chicago. Ohio, we're only seeing the Ohio cities. Now, the scrolling here is the irritant that I alluded to, and we'll adjust that in a second. Maybe that's Cincinnati. We've got Colorado here. And what are the Colorado entries? And you see what's happening every single time. We're getting only the cities from the appropriate state. Now, what is annoying is that because we've got these blanks for some states, a lot more, in fact, blanks for every state except California, what we'd like to do is effectively take all the blanks here and essentially get rid of them. Now, they're part of the range name definition. So, an obscure but powerful tool off the Home tab, the extreme rightmost button, find and select, go to special. Let's select these blank cells within that range. There they are. Let's right click on them and delete them. delete just the blanks, and shift those cells leftward. Now that was the least critical of all this, but now, for example here, we'll make an entry, pick a different state. Illinois, again, click there, drop arrow. It's much easier to read. We don't have to worry about seeing just a few of them. It's just a cleaner version of what we'd seen earlier. Let's fill these in. There's no way to have done this without the indirect function. And again, recognizing that's a little bit obscure, if you go through these steps as you're trying this, you can see the enormous appeal of this, you might call it a double data validation definition here, to, again, allow people to pick items out of a list rather than boring typing. It's a great feature.